Welcome to This Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because honestly, we're looking at a massive, incredibly exciting shift happening right now in educational leadership. We're going to explore how today's principals are stepping away from that traditional top-down management style and embracing a true design mindset to solve some of the most complex, stubborn problems in their schools. It's a completely fresh way of looking at education, and I literally cannot wait to share it with you. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever stopped to actually think about how principals solve problems? I mean, really solve them. Because before the very first bell even rings in the morning, a principal is already navigating an absolute mountain of challenges. Sure, there are the expected administrative hiccups, a delayed bus, maybe a broken heater, but the most critical problems they face, they aren't going to be found on any spreadsheet.
The real challenges are what we might call the invisible problems. Think about an anxious parent, right? Someone who desperately needs reassurance about their child's future. Or a student whose sudden burst of poor behavior is, well, it's actually just a mask for deep-seated anxiety. What about a high-performing teacher who's quietly burning out and considering resignation? Or a brand new staff member feeling completely isolated from the school culture? These are profoundly human problems, and you simply cannot fix these with a new policy, a memo, or some strict checklist.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to quickly cover 5 things. 1. The hidden job. 2. The Stanford pivot. 3. The 5 stages. 4. Solving real school problems. And finally, number 5. Designing the future.
Let's start right in with section 1, the hidden job, which goes way beyond basic administration.
Now, while budgets, schedules, and compliance absolutely matter, a school is not just some policy-driven machine. Fundamentally, a school is a living, breathing network of human relationships. And the urgency to handle these human relationships correctly is actually backed up by the data. Just consider this striking statistic from the World Economic Forum. 39% of workers' core skills will change by 2030. Almost 40%. The world is evolving at a breakneck pace. If schools are going to nurture adaptability, creativity, and resilience in students to meet this future, well, the leadership running those schools has to model that exact same adaptability and problem solving.
And this brings us to a really stark contrast in how leaders operate today. On one hand, we have traditional leadership. This approach often just treats the symptoms. It assumes that enforcing a policy or leaning heavily into discipline, essentially just using authority, will produce the change you want. But on the flip side, we see design leadership. This mindset understands that if you want lasting change, you've got to dig into the root causes. You have to redesign the experience itself, focusing entirely on empathy. Understanding people is what produces real change, not just commanding them.
Moving right along to section 2, the Stanford pivot. This is a fascinating hospital story.
To truly understand this design mindset, we actually have to look outside of education for just a second. Back in 2004, students at the Stanford D.school were tasked with redesigning the hospital experience. And what those Stanford students discovered was just incredible. Most people assumed the way to improve a hospital was, better medical equipment or faster doctors. Now, what's really interesting about this is, by simply observing the patients, the students realized patients' anxiety actually peaked during the waiting process, not the treatment. Patients were terrified because they were waiting alone with zero information. The problem was entirely human, not medical. By simply adding communication boards, clearer explanations, and friendly volunteers to the waiting rooms, patient anxiety plummeted.
Which leads us to section 3, the 5 stages, a really powerful framework for change. That hospital revelation leads us directly to the methodology of design thinking. It's a structured way of solving really complex problems by putting human needs right at the absolute center. Here's how that framework breaks down into 5 actionable stages. First, empathize. You just listen and observe without any judgment. Second, define. You use those observations to find the real underlying issue. Third, ideate. You imagine all sorts of alternatives without searching for one perfect answer. Fourth, prototype. You build a small-scale, low-risk test. And finally, test and improve, where you learn from what works and, frankly, what fails. This framework frees leaders from the paralysis of waiting for the perfect solution. It encourages you to just try something small and learn from it.
Okay, section 4, solving real school problems. Let's see design thinking in action. Let's shift our focus back to education and see how a principal actually applies this framework to the relatable, everyday scenarios that happen in the hallways. Consider this classic mini-mystery. Your principal and a large group of students are consistently arriving late to school.
Now, a traditional leader might immediately assume it's just a lack of discipline, right? They'd hand out detentions, maybe write a stern letter to the parents, and just double down on the rules. But a principal using design thinking, they ask questions first. By actually interviewing the students, they uncover a total surprise. It was poor arrival design, not poor discipline. Multiple buses were arriving at a heavily congested gate at the exact same time, creating these massive physical bottlenecks that the students simply couldn't get through fast enough. By redesigning the traffic flow and just staggering the buses, the lateness vanished. The problem was the system, it wasn't the students.
Let's look at another super familiar challenge. Why are students avoiding the school library? The immediate assumption from a lot of teachers was that modern kids just prefer scrolling on their mobile phones to reading physical books. Sounds plausible, right? But instead of forcing mandatory reading periods, the principal applied empathy. They just stood and observed the library. They noticed students would walk in, look around, stay for barely 2 minutes, and then leave. The big discovery? The environment itself was incredibly uninviting. Tall, imposing shelves, poor lighting, and a demand for absolute silence. Basically, your classic shushing librarian setup made the space feel intimidating, not inspiring. So, the school created some low-stakes prototypes. They brought in comfortable seating, created areas for student book recommendations, set up interactive reading corners, and added really colorful displays. And get this, they didn't change a single book in the catalog. Not one. But within months, library visits doubled. Why? Because the experience of the library had been completely transformed. Let's tackle one more. Why are classroom disruptions increasing? When behavior spikes, the knee-jerk reaction in almost any school is to implement stricter rules or harsher punishments to quickly regain control. But empathy interviews with the students revealed they were acting out because they felt completely disconnected from the material. The lessons were entirely passive. And here is the absolute key takeaway from this scenario. The solution wasn't punishment, it was engagement. By redesigning the lessons to include collaborative, project-based participation, the disruptions naturally faded away. Again, we see that the most effective solutions come from understanding people, not trying to control them. So, the crucial point is, empathy isn't just a soft, fuzzy buzzword. It means listening before leading, and we actually have hard data to back this up. OECD research confirms that students who report strong relationships with their teachers display higher engagement, better well-being, and stronger academic outcomes. This matters so deeply because before you can fix the curriculum, or update the infrastructure, or improve the test scores, you absolutely have to build that human connection. All right, our final section, Section 5, Designing the Future, Adopting a New Mindset. As we've seen through all these examples, design thinking isn't just a clever one-off workshop you attend on a random Friday afternoon. It is an ongoing, deep-seated cultural mindset that entirely transforms how a school operates. To build this culture, leaders really need to foster these 5 mindsets of innovation every single day. Empathy, listening to truly understand your community. Curiosity, always asking if there's a better way to do things. Collaboration, knowing that better solutions emerge when you hear multiple voices, from parents all the way to support staff. Experimentation, giving teachers the permission and the safety to pilot and test new ideas without any fear of failure. And reflection, always pausing to ask, okay, what did we actually learn from this? And this brilliantly illustrates the core shift in a leader's mindset. The questions you ask totally dictate the solutions you find. A traditional leader asks, rather rigidly, how do we stop students from talking? That question leads strictly to rules and silence. A design leader asks, with open curiosity, how do we make learning so engaging that their discussion becomes productive? That open question leads directly to innovation. Better questions create better schools. It really reminds me of this powerful quote from Steve Jobs. Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. This is so profoundly true for schools. Every single timetable, every classroom layout, every parent meeting, every morning assembly, these are already designed experiences. They're already teaching your community exactly how your school works, for better or worse. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to carry with you. The question isn't whether your school is being designed, it already is. The real question is, are your school's experiences designed intentionally? Tomorrow morning, I want you to step back, take off the title of administrator for a moment, and just become an observer. What is the actual experience happening in your hallways? Once you start looking at your school through the eyes of a designer, you will literally never see it the same way again. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it sparks some incredible new designs in your own community.